Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. This is the Voices of Healing podcast. I'm your host, Tina Clark. Today's guest is Brent Michael Phillips. He was and probably still is an MIT engineer, but he turned into an energy healing later in life and because he experienced a miracle. So he's going to share with us his story, a little bit more about his background, and some really good case studies on energy healing. So, welcome to the show, Brent.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. This is awesome.
So, tell the audience a little bit more about yourself. How do you turn into an energy healer after being an MIT engineer?
Yeah, it's kind of funny that I would admit that had you told me 30, 40 years ago that I would spend most of my life being a full-time professional healer, I would have thought you were nuts. Or, wondering, what are you smoking and can I have some, right? As a growing up, as a boy and a young man, I was pretty much your typical nerd. I loved video games, Dungeons and Dragons, Star Wars, all that kind of stuff. And the one thing I knew is that I wanted to be a computer programmer, as I had always loved computers. I wrote my first video game when I was 12 years old. So I ended up in college at MIT, which was a great fit, nerd capital of the world. And it was at MIT I discovered the internet. Now, that sounds funny to the younger listeners, but I got there in the late 80s. And I was like, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe there's this whole worldwide computer network that I had never heard of. And long story short, I made that my specialty. So I got my bachelor's degree, got my master's degree, and I was working on my PhD as a specialist in internet networking. And one of the really cool things we did was me and my two guys that I shared the office with in grad school, we sent the first ever live synchronized audio video stream over the web in 1994. So we were doing some really cool stuff. We were part of the World Wide Web Consortium. And, I am somewhat proud. I am one of the people that created the internet. Though I want to be clear, I was a very small cog in a really big wheel. There were a lot of people involved, but I was legitimately one of them. And when the internet boom hit, I'm like, wow, this is my gold rush. And so I left MIT, moved to California, recruited my lifelong best friend, and started two internet companies, one to create websites and one to make video games. And it's kind of funny that the very first website I ever built in my life was the website for the launch of the Sony PlayStation in the summer of 1995. That was my first website beyond Brent's homepage. And the things went really well at first. A year later, I had 15 people working for me. We did the website for Nissan Motors, Disneyland, several divisions of Sony, a couple game publishers. But I was kind of bored with the web, so we had started a second company to make a new kind of online game that had never been done before. Today we call them MOGs, or massively multiplayer role-playing games. But I used everything I'd learned and created at MIT to create this brand new kind of entertainment. And long story short, the strain of bootstrapping two startups caused me a massive health crisis. I had horrible pain. And long story short, little by little, I couldn't work like I used to. I went from 100 hours a week to 80 to 60 to 40 down to about 15, 20. I went to doctors and physical therapy. I had really devastating repetitive stress injuries. Now, there was more to it than that. I learned a lot later. I had chronic Lyme disease. I was suffering from chemical poisoning. I had an undiagnosed neurological disease. So I was kind of a train wreck. But I figured, I'll go to the doctors. They'll be able to fix me. But 3 years of climbing the food chain, I didn't get better. I just kept getting worse. And I'll never forget, it was in early 1998. I finally got accepted to have a consultation with the head doctor at the Curlin Job Clinic, which was a big deal, considered one of the top orthopedists in the world. And I was there in physical therapy alongside professional athletes, Lakers, Dodgers, Olympians. So these were the best people. And I was so excited because I'm like, wow, this guy will know what to do, right? He'll be able to fix me. And so, I was so excited to meet him. And when I went into his office, and he's kind of sitting there looking at all my medical records, and he just kind of scratched his chin and was looked at me and said, "Well, I'm sorry, son. There's nothing I or any doctor can do here. You're always going to be in pain and you'll never be able to work again." And I was stunned. I didn't expect that. And I'll never forget the last thing he said before I left his office. He said, "Son, you got somewhere you can go, somewhere you can be taken care of until you die?" And I was 27 years old. And he recommended me for lifetime disability. And on my way out, his secretary said, "Oh, Mr. Phillips, please just know all your future appointments are canceled. We can't be spending our limited resources on impossible cases like you." And so that was, the doctors gave up on me and sent me home to die when I was in my 20s. So I was depressed, even suicidal. I was in terrible pain. I could barely drive. And long story short, I went to my best friend and business partner, and we had been close like brothers for since junior high. And I told him what was going on. And again, I was just dumbfounded by his reaction. I expected to be all, "Brent, hang in there. We'll figure it out. Don't give up. I got your back," something like that, right? It had always been that before. And he just said, "Well, if you're never going to be able to work like you used to, you have no place here." So I got fired from my positions at the two companies that I had founded and that I had built up with my sacrifice and talent and ability. And he forged paperwork and pulled a bunch of legal games. And long story short, he sold the website company for millions of dollars behind my back. And I was left broke, living with in my parents' extra room with soul crushing chronic pain, being told I had no chance of recovery. I'd never be able to work again or have any kind of life. And so I was depressed. I started day drinking. I was using drugs. And I was lucky I didn't get too far down the rabbit hole, because a friend of mine turned me on to positive thinking. And he was like, "Brent, when life's got you down and you don't know where to go, positive thinking is there for you," right? Now, of course, last 20 years, we call it the law of attraction. In the 90s, we called it positive thinking. Same stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Go to your group and you jump around and shout out that you're going to be this big success. And I made a vision board and I said my mantras 108 times a day, and, joined a mastermind group and all that stuff. So for about 6 months, I was like positive thinking gung-ho warrior. But nothing changed other than my credit card bill kept going up, right? I was racking up debt going to these stupid positive thinking. And so I'm like, this is garbage. I gave up on it. And then I had another friend turn me on to alternative medicine. And, he was kind of the hippie type. And he was like, "Hey, Brent, don't worry about those doctors. They don't know everything. There's a lot more you can do." So he turned me on to Chinese medicine and osteopathy and homeopathy and a lot of really cool stuff. And, long story short, for the next 5 years, I lived in my parents' extra room, running up a gigantic credit card debt, doing all this alternative medicine. And it was so frustrating because nothing helped. I didn't just not get better, I kept getting worse. I was in more pain. I had less ability. There were some days, I remember one day, the phone rang. It was just back in the old days when we had landlines and the phone rang and you picked up the headset, right?
Hey, I remember those days.
Long ago. And the phone rang and I went to pick it up and it was like someone had stabbed me in the arm with an ice pick. Just this pain that I dropped the phone and it broke. I mean, it was that kind of pain. It wasn't like, "Oh, gee, my wrist is stiff." It's like I could barely function. And I didn't know what to do. And after 5 years of failed treatments, and I'm like, what, $40,000 in debt at this point, I went to have an experimental surgery. And there was a doctor doing a trial, and I got accepted. And the only upside was it didn't cost me anything. It was all experimental trial. But long story short, I had the surgery on my elbow. And when I woke up from the surgery, my right arm was paralyzed. Couldn't move my arm. And so my arm was frozen and immobile for over 5 months. And I'd been to physical therapy. They tried another surgery. I had a manipulation under anesthesia, all this kind of stuff. And my arm just wouldn't move. All until I went to see a woman. Her name was Terry. And she was an old friend of my Aunt Lauren. And I had actually known her casually. She had come to like Thanksgiving a couple times, right? I actually knew her fiance, Rick, a lot better because he was a computer geek. So whenever Terry showed up, me and Rick would run off into the corner and chat, right? So anyhow, Terry, her story was she had been a really successful financial professional. She was Wharton School MBA, New York City career girl, super smart, talked 100 miles an hour. And she was almost killed by a black mold infestation. And the thing that saved her life was energy healing. And I remember getting the email. She's like, hey, everyone. It was one of those everyone I know emails that we used to do in the old days.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, hey, everyone, I want you to know I'm no longer doing finance at ARCO. I'm going to be a full-time energy healing practitioner. If anybody wants to know more or book a session, give me a call. And I remember seeing that and go, wow, too bad. I figured another one's gone off the deep end of the new age pool, right? But my Aunt Lauren was bugging me. She'd call me about once a month. Hey, Brent, how's it going? How you feeling? How's your arm? Have you talked to Terry yet? And I was like, yeah, Lauren, Terry can't help me. I've done Reiki healing and pranic healing and yoga and, acupuncture and homeopathy and all this stuff, right? None of it helps. And I don't want to spend any more money. And I don't have any, I'm so deep in debt, I can't do it. And she kept bugging me until about 5 months later, she gave me an offer I couldn't refuse. She's like, Brent, go see Terry. Not only will I pay for the session, I'll take you anywhere in the city you want to go for dinner. I was like, even Drago? And she's like, yes, Brent, even Drago. I'm like, okay, I'll do it. So I made an appointment and I went to see Terry. And it was so interesting because the work she did was all done with the mind. There's no hands-on, there's nothing you take, there's no machine or anything like that. And she introduced me to what we call muscle testing or applied kinesiology. Mm-hmm. And basically said, hey, what we're going to do is I'm going to ask you questions and we're going to find subconscious blocks and we're going to clear them and then we'll heal you at the end. I was like, sure, whatever, right? And so we had our session. Yeah,
this is not
honestly,
work.
Right. I was just there for the free dinner. I mean, that was my agenda, right? I'm like, are we done yet? I really want to go to Drago tomorrow. Are we done? And so anyhow, she asked me a lot of questions about my childhood, what had happened with my best friend, the loss of my career, the pain I'd been in. And to be fair, it was very interesting. But the whole time I'm going, hey, lady, I'm not here to talk about my feelings. I'm here because I'm in pain and I can't move my arm, right? And so she went through, we did, the muscle testing and she did this block clearing process over and over. And at the end of our session, she's like, okay, we're going to heal your arm now. And I'm thinking, right, you and what army, right? Doctors gave up on me. I've had surgeries, physical therapy, all this stuff. Nothing can help here. And so, she kind of closed her eyes and went into a trance. And I'm looking out the window, thinking about what am I going to watch on TV when I get home? And it was maybe 30, 40 seconds later, there was this loud pop and snap in my elbow. And it kind of startled me. And I was like, whoa. And I remember Terry opened her eyes and she's like, okay, let's try your arm. And I did. And I was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe it. It was a freaking miracle. I could move my arm again. Though, honestly, what I said was a little more R-rated. We won't repeat that here in case there's children listening.
Right.
But I was so shocked that, I experienced a genuine life-changing miracle. And in that moment, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know what just happened here, but I got to learn this. And so that became my new path. But before we go further, I just want to be really clear and honest with everyone listening. That what did happen that day was my arm, had not been able to move for 5 months. None of the treatments helped. And after 1 hour with Terry, where there wasn't even any physical contact, there was this loud crack and I could move my arm again. It was like magic. And that never gave me a problem again. What did not happen that day was it wasn't like all my problems got solved in an hour. So I still had a chronic pain. I was still depressed. I had social anxiety, a lot of back pain, arthritis in my knee, trauma from all this and that and the other. But that miracle with my elbow, that was the validation I needed. And long story short, I started learning healing. And it's kind of funny. I think you'll appreciate this, Tina, that when I started it, I figured this would be easy. Because I'm like, hey, I was valedictorian of the top public high school in the country, National Merit Scholar. I had a perfect 5.0 out of 5.0, basically straight A's across 7 years at MIT in the most difficult, most competitive major. So I figured learning healing, this will be a piece of cake, right? Let me just say, I figured I could have it mastered in 6 months. It took me about 10 years. And long story short, I was so stuck in my mind, it was really hard for me to learn it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a whole new skill set, right? Imagine someone that had spent their whole life laying in bed and training them for CrossFit. You can do it, but it's going to take a long time, right? It's something you have never done before.
And you're using a different part of your brain.
Absolutely.
That you are using your left brain for
Yep.
all of this, for school, math, science, all of it. And then
Yep.
this is about the right brain, which we
Exactly.
all have, and get pushed under the rug like it's not important, but it's a very real part of our brains that we're not utilizing.
It is. It is interesting. And I think the only reason I had any hope of success was when I was at MIT. I always practiced martial arts and played guitar. And I think that was enough. That gave me enough of the connection to the right brain and the body that, again, it took me 10 years to really master this, but I was able to do it. But I also want to be clear, I'm not one of those people that was born with some phenomenal natural talent for healing. There are people out there. And so what I realized after 6 months, I wasn't a master. I came up with a new plan. I'm like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to study with the best people I can find, and I'm going to reverse engineer what they're doing and figure out how it works. So that was my path. And so I worked with a lot of incredible people, different healers, intuitives, shamans, sages, spiritual teachers. And little by little, through a lot of repetition and taking a huge amount of notes, I figured out what they were doing and how it worked. And that's kind of what I do today. My angle is that if you want someone to give you a big hug and tell you it's going to be okay, that's great. But that's not me. I'm very data driven. I'm about evidence, results. I'm kind of ruthless about let's figure out what the problem is and solve it. So that's my approach. And I've developed some amazing technology to do so. But before we get into that, I want to offer the second part of the story, which was that one of the things I discovered on my journey is I had tried all these different kinds of self-improvement, from masterminds and vision boards to acupuncture and herbs and cleanses and Reiki healing and Pilates and yoga and osteopathy and all this cool stuff. And what I found was that we are essentially, it's a form of technology. And that's how I see it. And I remember there was a time I was in grad school at MIT, and it was one of those brutal, hot, humid summer days in Boston. And on those days, a lot of the grad students, you go into the computer server room, and it's filled with grad students in sleeping bags. Why? It was the only place on campus that had air conditioning 24/7. And so I was there one night, laying there looking at the lights twinkle as I was falling asleep. And it struck me, I'm like, wow, people work just like computers. Your body's the hardware and the subconscious is the software. Because the NLP was very popular on campus because Noam Chomsky was there. But at the time, I'm like, that's interesting, kind of forgot about it. Then years later, I started learning healing and I thought the same thing. I'm like, wow, this is just technology. That what happened with Terry was essentially she debugged my subconscious. That the subconscious is just a bunch of programs, just like computer code. And what I found was that of all these different, I got certified in like 27 different modalities. I've taken all these seminars, read hundreds, if not thousands of books. What I found was we can roughly group all of self-improvement into 3 generations of what I call consciousness technology. In other words, working in the medium of human consciousness, the power of our thinking, our focus, how our bodies work, what's in the subconscious. And what I would call the first generation is kind of your traditional positive thinking, law of attraction, Think and Grow Rich, and The Secret, right? It's a good foundation, but most people find it's fun and interesting, but it doesn't really move the needle. And that was my experience. Spent a lot of time, a lot of money doing positive thinking, and it made me feel better for a short time, but it didn't solve my problems. When it gets really interesting is in the second generation. That's when we look at different modalities that know how to work directly with the subconscious. So well-known examples would be things like Psych K, theta healing, emotion code, healing codes, things like that. And they all work on the principle, and they have different ways of identifying the blocks and fixing it, again, just like a computer. And I found that the second gen technologies that I learned from Terry were very effective, but they couldn't do everything. They're amazing for physical health and healing. So if me or one of my friends or family had cancer or was injured in an accident, that's what I would apply. And it helped me to reduce my pain. I got off disability. And I was able to start functioning normally again. Started a business doing healing, started to exercise. I started dating, eventually got married, not once, but twice. and so the second gen was really good, the energy healing for some things, but there were some things it just didn't really help with. I found it didn't make a big difference in terms of money and career success. Helped a little, not a lot. It also didn't change kind of my inner game very much. It was still kind of the same me on the inside. And so after 5 years of working with Terry doing the second gen work, I had made a lot of progress, but I was still suffering. I was still very negative. I was unconfident, cynical. And I just figured it would always be like that. And then, metaphorically, my car ran off the road into another ditch. So 5 years after the first miracle with my elbow, I had another life crisis, another dark night of the soul, as they call it, where everything kind of goes wrong. And long story short, I had not only paid off all my debt doing healing, I had actually saved some money. And long story short, one of my friends who was also a healer turned me on to this guy who was supposedly a whiz with finance. And long story short, I gave him all my money, and it turned out it was a Ponzi scheme. And he stole over $55 million from people. And as far as I know, he's probably going to die in prison. He did eventually get caught and was convicted, but that didn't help me. And so not only did he take all my money, he had also, I don't know what this karma was, there had been loans taken out in my name, identity theft, and I was over $1 million in debt. And so I had to declare bankruptcy. And at the same time, I also suffered the worst heartbreak of my life. Long story short, I met a woman. We went out a couple of times. We ended up becoming good friends, but she wasn't interested in me. But I just was crazy, crazy in love with her. And she broke my heart. I used to joke about there's a big gaping, bleeding hole in my chest where my heart used to be. And these happened at the same time. So again, I was devastated. And it was literally the day after I declared bankruptcy, I met the man who would become my mentor. His name was Carl Wolf. And what had happened was I had been working for 3 years with a life coach and dating coach. His name was Brian. And Brian worked with me and tried to smooth off the rough edges. But after 3 years, I still, wasn't making more money. My business wasn't growing, and I was still striking out with dating, still doing terrible. And I remember Brian said to me one day, he goes, Brent, I don't do this very much, but I'm going to have to kick you up the food chain to the master. I don't think I can help you. And he gave me Carl's number. And so long story short, I spent my last $500 booking a healing session with Carl. Right. And then it was literally the day after I declared bankruptcy, I met him. And I remember it was so crazy. He told me, Brent, meet me by the rollerblade rental station at Venice Beach. I'm like, really? That seemed like a weird place to do a healing session, right?
I remember this story now.
Yeah. I'm like, usually you have an office or maybe you work out of the home or we get on a phone call, right? Like rollerblading at Venice Beach, right? And Brian had warned me, they go, Carl's going to seem weird, but he's really powerful. And so I met him there and he had me rent rollerblades. And the session was basically, I spent 20 minutes rollerblading in circles around the parking lot. And he videotaped me. And after that, we sat in his car and watched the video, and he just kind of criticized me. He kind of ripped me a new one, telling me what's wrong with my energy. Oh, you're ungrounded here, and you're leaking energy here, and you can't feel and all this stuff, right? And then after that, he was like, well, nice to meet you, Brent. And that was it. And I was angry. I'm like, seriously? Did I just pay you $500 to tell me my life is screwed up? I already knew that, right? Hello.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I went home, I called Brian, and I started to chew his butt off. I'm like, what the fuck, blah, 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 right? And I remember, he said, Brent, relax. Carl is out there for sure. He said, do me a favor, give it 3 weeks. And Brian said, if nothing changes in 3 weeks and you really felt you got nothing out of it, let me know. And I'll try to make it right. I'll give you more sessions or, to try to give you a few of my excess clients or something to make it up to you. I was like, all right. So I remember marking on my calendar, 1, 2, 3 weeks, call Brian, chew his butt off, right? And it was the craziest thing that it didn't take 3 weeks. It only took 3 days. That, long story short, a bunch of things happened. It wasn't like money fell out of the sky. But after 3 days, I had done almost $50,000 worth of business. I had my private session calendar was filled for almost 5 weeks. I had sold out my upcoming class. And I was just like, oh my God, what happened here? And that is our introduction to the 3rd generation technology, which is very rare. There's not a lot of people working there. But really, it's about a combination of what we call a beaming meditation, which is an entrainment that not only lowers your brainwave, but synchronizes it. And many people will see energy and auras with their open eyes and be able to see past lives. And there's a lot of cool stuff that goes on. But that was combined with doing special movements and having someone read your energy. That's what we call movement feedback holography. And the reason I was angry after the session with Carl is I didn't feel he had done anything to fix me. I expected him to smudge me or give me an herb or at least smack me in the forehead and say hallelujah, right? But there was none of that. What I didn't realize was he had been doing this beaming meditation with me the whole time. I was just so stuck in my mind, I didn't feel it. And the reason he had me rollerblade was by watching the video of me moving, he could read what was going on in my subconscious. And the way the combination of the beaming meditation, it's the entrainment and the feedback based on your movement creates a magical transformation. That's why I put it in almost on its own in a new generation, because I had never experienced anything like that.
I have never heard anything like that.
Yes, it was so crazy. And because I also want to call out for everyone, when I met Carl, I had been doing energy healing as a full-time professional for 5 years. So it's not like I was brand new to this stuff, right? I had done training in Psych K and human energetics, and I had learned theta healing, and I had been, to all these different teachers and things. A number, I did the angel therapy practitioner, and I did all this cool stuff. So I thought I kind of had it all pegged. And then I was introduced to this kooky old guy who had me rollerblade and just criticized my energy, and my whole life started to work. It was nuts. And so really what we're looking at is in Chinese medicine, they talk about the 3-legged stool. Have you heard that term?
Yes.
And it's roughly, everyone defines it a little differently. It's roughly acupuncture, herbs, and meditation. And so what I found with Carl's work, it's kind of its own 3-legged stool. There was the meditative piece we call beaming or consciousness shifting, which changes the way your brain functions. There's also the movement with the feedback, that it's a very physical, visceral experience. So it's done with the body just as much as the mind. And there is a intellectual aspect to what we call awakening, which is a very deep spiritual understanding based on Advaita Vedanta. That what exactly is consciousness? What is a human? How do we work? What is God? What is life? How does it all work? And you put the 3 together, it's really life-changing. And what I'm here to talk about is, again, I didn't invent any of this stuff. My job was to learn it, reverse engineer the masters, and then make it better, make it easier. Because that's exactly what they taught me at MIT. That's what a good engineer does. When you see some amazing piece of technology, you take it apart and you figure out how it works. Then you put it back together and make it better. faster, easier, more powerful. And so in my system that I call Awakening Dynamics, there's really three pieces. We cover the three generations. The first generation, law of attraction, I don't spend a lot of time on because most people are already familiar with it, right? If you've seen The Secret or read Think and Grow Rich or something like that, you're set. That's really all you need to know. But it is important to have a positive mindset and a good attitude, for sure. It's just on its own, if you've got subconscious junk in the way, it's not going to do anything. The second generation is there, and I use that a lot for physical and emotional healing because it's really powerful for that. And so it's a matter of, I see it as debugging the subconscious. I talk to people, understand what their issue is, use a combination of intuition and questions and answers and muscle testing to find what kind of the bugs are there, and then have processes to clear them. And so that is still a part of what I do. And of course, there's millions of modalities and teachers that do a version of that. The reason I mention it, I think I've created a system that is a lot more powerful, easier, faster than others I've seen. I'm all about improving it, right? Best of breed. How do we make it easier? How do we make it faster? How do we make it more powerful? You might say that Awakening Dynamics versus, say, I'll just pick on Site K, even though I have a huge respect for it, good system. Site K is like a Model T. It works. It's a car, right? It'll take you somewhere. But it's kind of slow and clunky and difficult to use, and it breaks down a lot. And you can't really take a Model T on the freeway, right? Awakening Dynamics is like a 911 Turbo Porsche. It's the same principle as the Model T. It's just been 100 years of technological improvements. So same basic idea, just faster, easier, more comfortable, and has a much better stereo system. So that's a part of what I do. But what makes it unique is this integration of the third generation. And it was funny.
What do you call the third generation?
Informally we call it Carl stuff.
Named after Carl. Okay.
Because I learned it from Carl Wolf. Though I do, since he passed away in 2018. And I have met a few other people that do something kind of similar. But I was very proud that I was the only person he ever gave permission to teach and practice his work. Which is so crazy because he admitted to me years after I had met him. He goes, Brent, when I first met you, I was a little worried you'd be hopeless. Because he said he had never met someone more stuck in their head than me. And he had done this full time since the 70s. And again, I've been doing energy healing full time, professional for 5 years when I met him, right? But we call it the third gen or the Carl stuff. And really it's an embodiment process. That most of the first, second generation technologies work almost entirely with the mind. But the third gen with the movement, with the beaming, it's a very physical and visceral thing. That essentially, if you want to move the needle on your career, to make more money, to be more confident, to increase your charisma, your presence, we would talk about it in terms of being connected to the quantum field or connected to the space around us. And the metaphor I like to use is imagine that you and me are in spacesuits up in outer space. Even if I'm 2 feet away from you, I can flap my arms and do somersaults and it doesn't affect you at all. Why? There's nothing connecting us. We're in a void. And that's what happens when you live in the mind, when you're not embodied, when you don't have consciousness integrated through your body. And typically what happens is you can work really hard, but you don't get the results of your labor. You do something great, someone else makes the money, gets the praise. What Carl used to say is that you can make a living, but you'll never make a killing. And it's about creating that kind of what we call charisma presence dropping in. That you watch a great performer or a lot of celebrities. You may have the experience where you're there like for a seminar and someone like Tony Robbins walks in the room and you feel it before you see them. That's what it's about. And so If you and me are in outer space, then that's like being in the mind. We're disconnected. No matter how much effort you make, it has no effect on the world around you. All you do is make yourself tired. And that is how I live. That's how many of us live.
Do you
We're
feel
exerting all
like
this effort.
you had to go through these different stages? Like you have to go through the first generation of positive thinking, and you had to work within the second generation for a while to get to the
Yeah,
third
I
generation?
think for most people that's true. And so for someone that has never done anything like this before, I'm not going to throw you into the deep end with a movement and beaming on day one, right? It'd be like
Yeah,
someone who's batting out of shape going to CrossFit. Bad idea, right?
yeah.
You need to build up to it. So yeah, I would say start with something simple. Go read Think and Grow Rich and watch The Secret. Great, you're done with the first gen.
Hmm.
Then I would say learn one of the second gen techniques. Again, lots to choose from, right? You can learn awakening dynamics from me. You can learn emotion codes, healing codes, psyche, all sorts of choices. That will get you a little more understanding how to work with the subconscious and give you some experience. And depending on the person, that may take a month or 6 months, might take a few years, because we're all in a different place. And then when you're kind of get comfortable for that, then we introduce the third gen, because it is weird and different. And one of the differences between me and Carl was he was a phenomenally powerful person, but he really didn't understand what he was doing or how it worked. So he'd have people come to his seminars, and every time I assisted him teaching, there was always one or two people that angrily stomped out of the room. Why? He was taking a place that they didn't understand, that they had no context for.
And it doesn't sound like he really was explaining it.
No,
Like
he
he
didn't
didn't
explain it.
explain it to you either.
Nope, he didn't. That was just how he was. And it's funny that after I had been working with him, we co-taught a lot of our seminars together the last 5 years. And people would ask him, "Hey, Carl, can you explain this?" And he'd be like, "No, but Brent can. Talk to him at lunch." and so yeah, for sure. And to complete the metaphor, if you and me are sitting in a hot tub, then if I move my body, you feel it, don't you? Because we're both in water, and the water connects us. So when I move, it has an effect on the environment. It has an impact. And that's what happens. That's why we do the third gen work. It's to get the consciousness back into our body and reconnect to that divine flow, the flow of life. And people that really have it, you can tell their movement is very smooth. You can feel their presence. They're somewhat hypnotizing. So a lot of great performers, musicians, athletes have that presence and charisma. And that's why they have huge careers, and life just works well for them. But again, it doesn't mean everything's perfect.
Right.
Things went wrong in Carl's life. He was in a fender bender, right? I remember one time a pipe broke in his condo and it flooded. And one time he ended up in the hospital with shingles. So, it's not saying it's a ticket to a perfect life, but things tend to break your way a lot more often than not. And one of the examples I like is that the first time we traveled together, he was leading a retreat in New England, and we were booked on the same flight. And I remember I'm like, "Hey, Carl, why don't we share a cab to the airport?" And he was like, "Sure, that makes sense." So, we got to the airport and we go to check in at LAX, and the security line is just crazy. And I'm like, "Oh my God, we're going to miss the flight. This is a disaster." And I'm all freaking out, right? Catastrophic thinking. And I remember Carl said, "Brent, relax. We haven't missed the flight yet. Let's just see what happens." And not more than 5 minutes later, we're just standing there at the back of the line, right? A woman in a TSA uniform walks right up to him and says, "Sir, if you'd like, I can take you and your companion through the first class check-in." And Carl's like, "Oh, we'd appreciate that. Thank you." So 2 minutes later, we're through security, and we're walking to the gate. And I'm like, "Hey, Carl, how did you know her?" As I figured she must know him. I'm like, "Is she a client or a friend of the family or a neighbor, right? How did you know her?" And I remember he laughed. He said, "No, Brent, I've never seen her in my life. But things like that happen all the time to me." That's the zone. That's the field. That's the third
Hmm.
gen. So it's about confidence, presence, charisma, being connected to the space around you. So the actions you take have an impact. So if you're disconnected, you can be a genius, like my computer game. I created the world's first graphical real-time MOG 2 years ahead of when Sony did. And we had a $300,000 budget. They had a $55 million budget. So I created this amazing technology, but it went nowhere. The company failed. Why? I was not connected to the field. I had been disconnected from the flow of life. And the third gen is about understanding intellectually consciousness, God, life, how it all works, learning how to entrain your brain and nervous system with the meditation. So you see and feel that flow, and working with the physical movements to get the consciousness in your body to get reconnected. You know, I say it's really easy to squeeze toothpaste out of a toothpaste tube, but it's hard to get it back in. That's what we do with the third gen. We're getting the toothpaste back in the tube. And I know I wanted to share just a couple case studies of things I'd done with people. One of my favorite second gen healings that was a big deal to me, I mean, obviously my elbow, but in 2010, my mother was diagnosed with clear cell endometrial cancer. And that's one of the ones that's considered a death sentence. And I remember I did one session of healing with her over the phone, using the tools, right? Finding the blocks, clearing them, etc. And it took about 45 minutes. And then for the healing, I was nervous because her life was on the line. So I invited all of my students and teachers and bribed them with dinner to come together. And we all did a group healing on her. And I remember she asked afterwards, I'm like, Mom, what did you feel? She's like, oh, it was the weirdest thing. I felt this heat like warming up inside my belly. It almost got painful, and then it subsided. And she went to have surgery the next week. And after she had surgery, her oncologist said, Aaron, this is a weird thing, but we couldn't find any of the dangerous cancer in any of the tissue we removed. And that was 15 years ago now. It was January of 2010. And knock on wood, she's still cancer-free. So you're doing something right when the doctors are confounded.
Yeah.
Yeah, they write it off as, oh, it's a spontaneous remission, it happens. I'm like, yeah, really, it must be a coincidence that it happened immediately after you did this healing process, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I could go on and on for days about what I call medical miracle testimonials, instant healings of asthma, allergies, back pain, migraines. I mean, you name it, cancer. But again, I want to be honest. It's not 100%. Not everyone gets a miracle the first time. Some people do. Sometimes there is a longer, more rigorous process.
Mm-hmm.
That was me and my chronic pain. One session did not make a dent in my chronic pain, though my elbow did heal. It took me years of work to really overcome the chronic pain. A lot of stuff. One of the best testimonies I can give for the third gen work is, the success thing. And I was far from the only one. And I actually was a little bit on the slow side, because I remember the first thing Carl asked me when we met that day, he said, are you Brent? I'm like, yes. That was the first thing he said. The second thing he said was, are you ready to add a zero to your income? And I laughed. I thought it was an icebreaker. I learned later that wasn't meant as a joke. That many of the people that do the work, and again, this is generally not in one session. It happens, but that's very rare. Usually it'll take a year, 2 years of the work before you see a real shift. But there were others, people in my intensive group, other students that really did start making 10 times as much money. My life coach, Brian, that referred me, he did it. I was kind of a head case. I was kind of on the slow track. I only tripled my income in a year, but I was still totally happy with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I see it as my goal is to bring for every person to bring the right tool for the job. And for those that are interested in physical healing, emotional healing, the second gen tools are amazing. My goal is to bring you through that process as quickly and easily as we can. For those that have more of a need, if you're suffering, if you have low self-esteem, if things aren't clicking in your life, if you're working, if you're talented, if you're educated, but things just don't break your way, that needs the third gen. We got to get you reconnected to this flow of life. and get you out of your own way, as they say. And it does sound a little bit like superpowers. And I remember when I did Carl's program, it was called Intensive Life Training. I had heard all these great stories. I thought it was like the Mutant Academy in X-Men, where I'd go and do this program and suddenly I'd have a superpower. And again, I want to be clear and honest with everyone. It's not a superpower, though it may seem like that sometimes. What it really is just being a little bit better version of you. Being your true self, if that makes sense. Because there's the true self, what you're meant to be, and there's the idea in the mind that the ego has of what our life should be. They don't always match. And a lot of it is simply trusting the divine flow of letting you be who you are, if that makes sense. And this is one of the things I found with dating, that I struggled with dating because I had an idea in my head of a cool, confident guy that gets dates with a lot of women. And I tried to be that, and it didn't work at all. What I realized at some point is I'm a huge nerd. And when I just was genuine with who I was, it was crazy. I started to get dates. So it's about just being what you are. And, I'll just tell a quick story about Brian that I love, that before I met him, the reason he became a dating coach was he had terrible struggles with women in dating. He'd been a hypnotist and he was making money, had a good business, but couldn't get a girlfriend to save his life. His issue was he started going bald in his late 20s. And he tried to hide it. He tried wearing hats and doing comb overs and toupee and hair surgery and all these things. And he just never clicked. What changed it all for him was the day he decided to just shave his head and show up as a bald guy. That's an example of what I mean of if you just be what you are, life can work better. If you stop worrying about it, thinking about it, right? As I remember, he would tell me, Brent, just be yourself. I'm like, oh God, Brian, that's the worst advice ever. That doesn't work. And what that means is don't be the you think you are in the mind and the ego. Be the genuine you. And you will make more money. You will be healthier. You'll feel better about yourself. People will like you more. You'll have more friends. If you're single, you'll have more dates. And that's really what I want to offer, that ultimately we come to this work usually because we have a problem or a goal we can't achieve, right? I'm in pain. I have a disease. I'm hopelessly single, or I'm in a bad marriage, or I can't get a good job, or whatever the drama is. And most of us, when we come to it, we just want to solve our problem. What we don't realize is the higher part of us, what we call the soul of the higher self, that was all intentional. Of course it was. Life is really about the evolution of consciousness. And we're given problems because they force us to evolve ourselves, to learn new things. And ultimately, there's no problem in life that cannot be solved with a higher level of consciousness. And it's difficult because our culture sticks us so deeply into the mind and the ego. And especially with social media, it's causing all sorts of issues with mental illness and low self-esteem because we compare ourselves to these influencers we see. And we go, oh, she's so pretty or so thin, or he's so confident or so rich. And we feel bad because we think we can't be that. That's what I mean by we get in our head. We have an idea of what we think our life should be like, and then we're suffering, frustrated, miserable because it's not showing up the way we want. Ultimately, if you learn how to evolve your consciousness and just trust the flow of life, it will take you maybe not to exactly where you thought you should go, but often to somewhere better. And that's really the takeaway. And for anybody that's interested, I would say the most important thing to see huge results in your life is to be willing to let go of what you think you know. It's so key. So all the things you think you know about yourself and life and money or dating or health, if you're willing to let it all go, you'll move through the process a lot faster. And that's why, when I share the issue with my elbow, that was kind of the low point for me physically. I was in terrible pain. I couldn't move my arm. I couldn't drive safely. I couldn't floss my teeth. I needed help getting dressed. And I was so desperate and so miserable, I was willing to try this crazy energy healing. And then 5 years later, when I met Carl, same thing, I was desperate. When I came out of MIT, I thought I had all the answers. I thought I was so smart. And then my life cratered. I went bankrupt. I was deep in debt. I was heartbroken. And I was willing to embrace and try something new and different. And that's why Carl would say, whatever takes you off your path always leads you back to it at a better place. Some would say to take 3 steps forward, sometimes you have to take 2 steps back. And just know that life happens for us, not to us. It's so critical. We all tend to think, oh, I have all these problems I have to get rid of. Right? I want to get rid of my pain and get rid of my crappy car and get rid of my awful job and my addiction or whatever it is. And we think, oh, when I can just get rid of all these bad things, then I'll be happy. It's like, no. All those things that go wrong in your life are all chosen by you to force you to evolve your consciousness and to really get out of the ego and reconnect to the flow. And again, how we do that is going to be different for every person.
So it sounds like the 3rd generation is really about abundance.
A lot of it is.
Yeah.
But
Getting to that abundant,
yes,
authentic self.
Yes. Where life is simply shows up with gifts all the time. And for the most part, it starts with small things. Like going to the airport and being brought through the first class check-in. That's not a big deal, right? Most of it is those little gifts. But when you put them together, they add up to a lot. And a lot of it is one of the first things that's necessary. And this is why I say not everyone's ready for it out of the gate. You have to be willing to lose everything you have. You have to be willing to lose your health, lose your money, lose your job, lose your family, lose everything. I'm not saying you have to lose everything. What I am saying is you must be willing to go through what they call the death of the ego. You have to be willing to go backwards a little bit to move forward. And I remember when I started doing this work with Terry, she had told me something similar. Brent, you have to be willing to let it all go. And I remember thinking, well, I'm willing to let go of almost everything, but not my home and not my cats. And so guess what happened? It wasn't right away, but both my cats died and I almost lost my home in the bankruptcy. It's a whole nother story. The only reason I didn't lose my home was there was a lawyer contesting the bankruptcy who got stuck in traffic and delivered a document to the judge 5 minutes late. And he threw it in the trash and discharged my debts and allowed me to move forward in my life. That's an example of, and this was right after I started working with Carl.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I say a lot of it's these little things, some of which you may not even be aware of. And so if you're willing to let go of what you think you know, the more you're willing to let go of what you have now, the more can come in. It can't be done from the mind in a manipulative way. We don't know how long it'll take or how it'll show up or any of that. What we know is there is a process that works. And again, dating is a great example. When I was dating between my marriages, I went on over 200 dates with over 100 women over 3 years. Online dating apps, singles meetups, going to all that stuff. That's what it took for me. My wife, she had signed up for a 3-day free trial on Match. I was the first guy that emailed her. We met, and that was that. She didn't have to pay for it. One online date, right? She had come off a breakup. She was feeling kind of lonely. She's like, you know what? Fine, I'll go on the app, right? And went on the website and signed up. We talked the next day, had our first date, and boom, 15 years later, we're married and have a family. And so what I want to offer to anyone that's interested to learn more, first, just know I'm not right for everyone. I'm intense. I'm obsessed with the truth, and I'm not a new ager. I love new age things, but I'm a nerd. I love truth, intellectualism, learning, rigorous debate. So I can be a little harsh because I want to take you to your goal, and it's not always easy. So anybody that's interested, my website is awakeningdynamics.com. You can also Google Brent Michael Phillips, and that should come up. But go to awakeningdynamics.com And for every person listening to this, watching this, as long as it's available, that you'll see a big button right on the homepage to book a free 15-minute call with me. And I do that because I want to get to know you a little bit. I don't want you to spend your time and money on me if I'm not the right person. So I'm going to give everyone, if you're serious about moving forward and you're a good fit for me, we can talk about next steps. If you're not, I'll do my best to recommend someone or something else that I think will work better for you. So I'll say in advance, don't be disappointed. I accept less than half of the people that apply. But that's because, again, I don't want you to waste time and money on something that's not going to deliver results. Right? It's kind of like going on a first date. If you know the person isn't right for you, don't string them along on 6 more dates. That's not cool. Just tell them, be honest, be kind. Don't waste their time and money. And that's true of everyone listening, for you, Tina, your friends and colleagues. Now, anybody that's interested to learn more, I'm happy to chat with you a little bit. We'll see if you're a good fit. If so, let's see where it leads us. If not, I'll try to point you in the right direction. I see myself as I'm like a lighthouse. My goal is to guide you from where you are now to where you want to be. Hopefully in a way that's safer and faster and easier than doing it on your own. And if you're like me, you may have to wreck your ship on the rocks a couple times before you get there. But my goal is to apply everything I know and learned so that doesn't have to happen to you.
All right. Well, Brent, that was quite a story. And thank you for sharing that, and all of that information. How to contact Brent will be in the show notes. And
beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. I'm always wanting to learn something new, and that third generation was a little unfamiliar to me. So I'm kind of fascinated now.
I'll warn you, it's weird, it's different, and it does have a steep learning curve. So, but the rewards are huge. It can do things nothing else can.
All right.
And, that's why I'm here.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, this has been amazing. This has been amazing. Thank you.